Good evening and welcome Cedar Falls to the standing committee meetings of Monday, June 5th, 2023. I will now call this meeting to order with a roll call from Madam Clerk.
Schultz.
Here.
DeBoer.
Here.
Cruz. Harding.
Here.
Ganfield.
Here.
Sayers.
Here.
Dunn.
Here.
Cruz absent.
All right, thank you. We have three committee meetings today. We're going to start with a committee of the whole with a council policy on official proclamations discussion. And I believe the mayor is, are you going to start us off or we're just going to go for it? All right. It's a council conversation. So it was in the packet and on the agenda. Who wants to start?
I will.
Yes, ma'am. Councilmember DeBoer.
Yeah, our proclamations in the past were always pretty much informational. And if you Google what a proclamation is, it'll tell you it's for a special announcement on something. On our agenda, we have both proclamations and special presentations. So we're kind of duplicating what we can do. And I'm going to use the no mo may or the low mo may one as the example. It was one where it wasn't, we never used to have to vote for a proclamation. It was something that the mayor would receive and he would read parts of it. I thought when these changes were made, it was because there were getting to be so many proclamations and they were taking 40, 50 minutes, that was why this change was made. But apparently that wasn't, I'm not sure why this change was made. We'll have to have the mayor explain that one. But what I'd like to get back to is maybe asking some of these proclamations instead be special presentations where they could do a slideshow or a presentation. For instance, the one we did on the mail carrier, where it would have announced to deliver your food or where to put it, would have been better than doing, it was done as a special presentation instead of as a proclamation, where the no mo or low mo may was done as a proclamation, was a split vote, and somewhat divides the community. And so I'd like to see if we can talk about, the very last one talks about emergency proclamations, so you can't do away with proclamations altogether because you have to keep the emergency proclamations. Perhaps, though, trying to get many of our other proclamations steered over to being special presentations.
All right. So I have a question for Mr. Rogers. Historically, proclamations have generally been mayoral driven. Is that true for just Cedar Falls, or what do other communities do with proclamations?
I'm aware of no other community that in Iowa in which the approval of the proclamation is done by council. They're generally done by the mayor, and council will allow time during the council meeting for the mayor to do that. Sometimes in one or two communities, if council members have a special interest in the issue, a council member will join in and read part of the proclamation, for instance. But Cedar Falls is unique in this regard, in which a proclamation is presented for council review and approval.
Okay. So I'll open it up again, but I guess we could talk about making it, the change back to just having it be a mayoral function with the proclamations that he wants to, or people want to bring forward to the special presentation. That way, because I believe we had, sometimes we had 3, 4, 5 even proclamations for a while that were read and gone over. And so I guess for efficiency, it could go back to the way it was with certain proclamations by people. They would request that it would be brought forward to the special presentations part, and they could have that read. Just a thought, but I'll open it up for other thoughts on the topic. Yes, sir. Councilmember Schultz.
So I guess that would be the question: if a proclamation such as the Pride, where the mayor had initially said he would not be in favor of it, then we wouldn't have the discussion we had and the outcome that we had. Or is it that the submission can be made to the mayor and then he just will do the proclamation, or does he still have that choice?
Councilmember DeBoer.
Well, my recommendation on that would be it could instead be a special presentation where they do slides and they perhaps tell to inform the public of the different events that might be happening. There were several different maybe picnics or events that were happening. They could use it in that form instead of having people divided.
Okay.
Councilman Harding.
Yes, Councilmember Dunn.
I'm all with not being unique in this situation. To me, this should be on the mayor's plate. If he chooses to say no to a proclamation or to approve a proclamation, he or she or they or whoever, that's on them. I don't think that we need to be muddied up in it. So I say put it back to, it's a mayoral duty and take the council out of it.
All right. Well, we have the mayor here, so he can explain some of the thought process behind the policy and ideas and thoughts that he has. So,
Sure, and I
floor is
wanted,
yours.
I wanted to give a chance to talk first without like jumping in right at the start. But the reason that I had brought forward that change in the proclamation policy was even though for other cities, as Mr. Rogers says, they have a different setup. In Cedar Falls, we have a very unique requirement on the mayor, and it's written in city code. Just like most other cities where there's an additional duties, like the other duties as assigned. For Cedar Falls, and I read this very strictly to what the ordinance says, is that in addition to the duties enumerated in this division, which are very clear, we updated several years ago, the mayor shall perform such other duties compatible with the nature of the mayor's office, which is great. So blank check, basically, if it's compatible. Except that it says, as the council may from time to time require. So I'm just reading a very close interpretation here that the council is restrictive on what the mayor's authorities are, and I think I'm totally fine with that. And so I would just say if the council wants to allow the mayor to speak for the city with a proclamation, then it should be listed in code as a power. And I know Mr. Rogers and I disagree on that, but again, taking a very strict view of what the mayor's roles are, that it's a limited role, I have the powers that the council assigns to me. So the option is either to have the proclamation listed as one of the mayor's authorities, or to change the code so that it doesn't say, as the council may from time to time require. Now, I'll tell you, it hasn't been an issue for mayors for, generations, but I also read very strictly on how my authorities are, and I don't want to overstep what the council has set for me as those authorities. I don't think any mayor should. It's a slippery slope.
Can I ask a question as a follow-up to that?
Yes, sure. Go ahead.
Rob, since the mayor's duty is to set the agenda, wouldn't it be true then if someone wanted to do a special announcement that you have every authority under that rule you just read to do that under the special presentation?
Sure, as long as it's not a proclamation. But as you mentioned, Councilor DeBeer, the coming forward for the mail, like the carrier food drive pickups, things like that could be done without saying an official proclamation. I just personally feel that a proclamation should represent the will of the city and not just the mayor. So I wouldn't want a mayor to, unless the mayor has been given that authority by the council, I wouldn't want the mayor to be off on their own doing something that the council doesn't approve of.
Yeah, and that was part of my thinking, because I think when you mentioned the role of the council, I think it should be things that we unanimously support and things that are dividing the community would be better as that special presentation and not as a
Certainly.
proclamation at all.
Right, because then we're not necessarily individually agreeing to things. We're just saying, here's what's happening in the community, and here there's a parade, there's some other activity, and that could be for any number of things that might be somewhat divisive. And as long as it's not illegal or damaging to good order, I mean, we can certainly think of some things that we might not want to come forward to council that would be like white supremacy kind of issues or things like that. We want to have our parade for this group. Well, that I think we could, as the presiding officer, I could say, no, we're not, that's hateful speech, or that's something that already is clear, like this isn't something that we should broadcast to the public. And the presiding officer, the mayor, would just have to be pretty careful about that and what comes forward, but not too much different from what else comes in public comment or public forum.
So basically, like what I was presenting kind of falls into how you're reading that interpretation and could be done.
Right,
So
yes.
proclamations would be more as something we would do as an emergency or as a seldom occasion versus a much more frequent as a special presentation.
Right. So my reading of it, unless the council were to change, if the view of council tonight is that you want to do away with council being involved in proclamations, unless we change the code, I'm not going to be issuing proclamations either, because I don't believe I have the authority to do so. And I'm just trying to be very respectful of what the council's role is here.
But you have the authority under emergency.
Emergency, absolutely. And that's why I said that specifically, is that's a state law that gives me that authority. And I think we would all agree, if there's an emergency or disaster, the mayor has to have that power to make quick decisions and to do things that in our code only last for 48 hours. And then they have to go before the council anyway. So I think we're in sync on that one.
Councilmember Dunn?
Yes, I think I like the way that that was just said better, because I think, lots of things can be, quote, divisive. I like what you just said, where you're just not going to issue proclamations unless of an emergency. I think that's a better thought in my mind. I am perfectly okay with the mayor having the authority to issue a proclamation. If that is not conducive to the people of the community, then they know who to talk to directly. So I guess I like the way you just put it better, because, we can turn all kinds of things into, quote, divisive issues. So, yeah.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir. Councilmember Cyrus.
I'd like to hear from Mr. Rogers again. Would you go ahead and tell us what you had and how yours was laid out on proclamations one more time, so we can...
The area of disagreement between the mayor and myself is that, let's kind of turn the question. Would council have the authority, if the mayor acted on his own, to issue a proclamation, put it on his website or his Facebook page? The answer is no. It's a First Amendment issue. He's an independent elected official of the city. So it's within his plenary authority to issue a proclamation, which is basically, I agree with Councilmember DeBoer, it's a fancy announcement, it's what it is. And I don't think council would have the power to prohibit the mayor from expressing his wishes in terms of a proclamation. Doesn't mean council agrees with it, because it's from the mayor's office. That's where we disagree. Mayor's taking a very narrow view of that ordinance when it comes to his powers and duties, but my position, he's an independently elected official, so he would have that right. There's nothing saying that council has to remain involved in it. I'm not suggesting that at all.
Thank you.
Other thoughts? Yes, sir. Councilmember Schultz.
Thanks. So if we were to go to the presentation, how could we set boundaries on that so it's not 45 minutes long? Or what would be the
Well,
timeline or the context
so-
of that?
So a couple things with the agenda and special presentations, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Rogers, is the mayor sets the agenda, so he would be the one who would set that. And if for some reason the mayor didn't want it on the agenda, 4 council members could request the clerk to put it on there as a special presentation as well, right? Okay, so that would be, if the mayor said no, that would be another avenue for the public to email all council members, and if 4 members requested it. And as far as the time of the presentation, we would have to put something in admin policy
Right.
that talked about how long the presentations could be, so that we didn't end up there for 2 hours.
That's where
Yeah.
that's where I was going to, but
Yeah, I like that idea of, having, I always want to have a separation of powers, but also the chance for the public, if the mayor didn't want to do something, that the council still could weigh in. And I think that it's clear in the code and our rules that the council has primacy over all these issues. So any 4 council members can overrule the mayor on something. So I think that's great for presentations to be able to do that. We could set a 5-minute limit with the option for the mayor to extend if necessary, or the presiding official, just like we do for a public forum. I think that would work really well.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. Councilmember Ganfield.
So an idea popped into my head about a special presentations opportunity with our Channel 15. It would remove the lengthy possibility, but also give this special opportunity. I think maybe you'd even mentioned that before as an opportunity to repeal this policy and potentially request that you draft a policy that moves those special presentations to some more central location off of the council desk here, where we get back towards dealing with legislative policy and rulemaking instead of those social issues. I would tend to agree with Mr. Rogers' interpretation that you have free reign, as we all do, to state whatever we choose to on social media or even in that avenue. I don't think there's been consistency in that narrow application with you wanting this to come from the council desk to say, hey, we say you should send this proclamation forward, because you have a job to do throughout the week and you spend countless hours working on things that you don't have to ask us permission for. So there's not a consistency that all those other duties, as the council may direct, we don't direct you on development things or on the council emeritus program, and those things still continue to go forward. So I think for sake of consistency, we repeal this policy and perhaps draft a separate one. Obviously, the emergency proclamation provision is already there. So removing this policy would take that timeliness out of it and the divisive issues that Councilmember Dunn has referenced off of the table, and still afford us the opportunity to have 4 councilpersons direct the agenda. I would note, Councilmember Harding as well, 4 councilpersons do not have the ability to overrule the mayor and remove from the agenda. So there are some items in which council is not in a position of primacy over our agenda and our meetings. So there are a couple other things that we might need to refer, but my recommendation in the interest of time would be to refer the removal of this policy to the council tonight, or during the council meeting, refer it.
So, quick question. 2 questions. One, would we need, I guess, what would be the cleanest way if we wanted to go back to the way it was? Would it just be, would we even need a new policy? So I would direct that to Mr. Rogers. Should we just motion to have this removed via putting it on the council agenda next time, or do we need to replace it with a policy?
So the policy as it stated needs to be amended, so you could refer to staff to amend the policy to eliminate council involvement in proclamations. And then I think we would put it back on an agenda for a future council meeting once staff makes the changes. We don't have to bring it back to committee since you're directing us to do so. Mayor, okay with that?
Yeah, but just for the record's sake, looking at things that are the mayor's responsibility, there are lots of things that are listed in official duties, but I do take direction from council through policies, and like as the executor of government, there's many things I take action on, and it's not because I decided on my own I want to do those. It's because I can point to some action from the council that gave me that authority. And unless it's an accident, I never do things unless the council has determined that that authority exists. So I just didn't want you to think I was going maverick on you.
All right. So I think for cleanliness, I would prefer to have a motion to make this happen.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
One point of clarification. Mr. Rogers, would it be cleaner to repeal CFD 1127, moving it back to the way it was, providing that opportunity for special presentations to still exist? And if we chose to refine those special presentations and put them into a different venue, that would require a new policy. Does removing this particular proclamation in total put us in a vulnerable spot as far as the emergency proclamations being enumerated?
As long as council expresses what it wishes to do finally, the end result, leave it to staff to draft it out and make sure it's okay. That's the way I would say it.
So we could entertain a broad motion to take council out of proclamations and bring forward something along those lines so that there's a little bit of liberalness there. It's not specific.
Yeah. Well, Mr. Chairman, I would make a motion to recommend to council that we remove the council involvement in city proclamations and remove this policy, their involvement in that as well.
I second that.
All right. Is there any questions from council on that?
How about a comment?
Yes, sir. Councilmember Cruz.
So we're concerned about the emergency proclamations and where they would fit in if we need to. Wouldn't staff update, mayor being a staff person, I guess, loosely, have the opportunity to give an update or an announcement, or at the end of the council meeting or near the end almost, council updates and announcements could include emergency proclamations? I don't know why that couldn't be. I mean, do we got to define that?
Jump in on that one because that's defined by state code of the
Which one, staff
determined
update?
by emergency for determined by proclamation. It's also in our city code of the specifics for that. So anything that you say here would not override my authority under state law, and I would actually have to preserve that. So I listed that in the policy just because I wanted to make it clear that the mayor having that authority. If you were to do away with it entirely, it just disappeared, I still would have the authority for emergency proclamations.
Based off state law.
based
I'm
on
not
the-
arguing that. I'm saying where we could put it in the agenda.
Don't need to. And it's not part of the agenda. The mayor issues proclamations for emergencies at any
Well,
time.
then why are
It's
we
not part
concerned
of-
about the language of having emergency proclamations if it's automatic?
So the state code requires that power be vested in the mayor, but I assume after a proclamation like that, an emergency proclamation is issued, in addition to all the public nature of that, the mayor would come and advise council of the proclamation and the conditions and when it would expire and things
Yeah,
like that.
so we seem to be worried about where it goes on the agenda.
Yeah.
Unless
I
I'm,
don't think we were
well, that's the
The motion is to remove it from,
emotional. Yeah,
on policy. Okay,
yeah.
that's fine.
to be
Okay.
clear, the motion on the floor is to remove the policy and the items from the council.
And it's an important question about the emergency power, the emergency proclamation. That's, 48 hours, that clock starts as soon as I sign it, and I've got to come back before council to have it continued. So we'd be looking at a special meeting for that. And I'm thinking of a situation like a flood, major fire, train derailment, things like that. So we're going to be here no matter what, dealing with those issues.
We did those quite often after the floods of '08. And I can refresh you guys on that if you're interested later.
Okay. Thank you.
So since we're in a motion, I'd like to ask if there's anyone from the public that would like to speak on this. All right, seeing none, I think we have enough information to take a voice vote on the motion. So does anybody need clarity on the motion, or are we good? All right, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, that passes. So we will now move over to Community Development Committee, and I'll pass this down to myself. Hello, I'm back. Bad humor, sorry. At least I got one laugh out of a dad beside me.
I thought it was cute.
Thanks. We are going to talk about the open space policies within subdivisions and the parkland and open space requirements. And I believe we have Miss Karen Howard here to go through the presentation. You are up. Welcome.
All right, good evening. So this was a referral back in January from the council. I requested an overview of the city's requirements for open space in subdivisions. Per the subdivision code, there's kind of vague language there that all subdivisions must meet the parks and open space needs of the residents of the subdivision. And historically, then there's two methods really of meeting that requirement. One is dedication and acceptance of parkland, and the second is reservation of private open space. Both of those things are both designated on the plat as outlots. One would say for dedication, the other one would say open space for reserved for open space. And then, of course, in the deed of dedication, if it was private open space, somebody would have to be responsible for the maintenance and care of that private open space at the time. Typically, that's the homeowners association. So current practice, we're really talking about neighborhood open space here, not large regional parkland. So size to be fit and serve the needs of a neighborhood. And of course, neighborhoods can be defined lots of different ways and lots of different sizes. So typically when we think about neighborhood-sized parks, we're thinking of parks that are about 1 to 5 acres in size. Just for some idea here on the screen, there's some different sizes of parks in the community to give an idea of how big parks are that are neighborhood-sized. So everything from the smaller neighborhood parks in our older neighborhoods, Overman Park and Searly Park, to some larger parks and more recent parks. Here on the screen is Green Hill Park, that's about 5 acres. And of course, you can see the small development of the Place to Play Park in that southern portion of that park. So private open space parcels are often do double duty as stormwater management, and then a lot of times they have some amenities, a trail around it, some sort of neighborhood open space, and so it does dual purpose. Sometimes they're just stormwater basins, and if they're wet bottom ponds, they can provide some amenity value for views from the people that live around the pond, but if there's no trail or anything, it really doesn't serve any kind of usable open space function. Some examples of private open space, our senior living communities often have double duty. Western Homes, the more recent Cedar Stone, both have their stormwater ponds with trails around them and some amenities. The most recent preliminary plat for Hidden Pines, a small subdivision, it had a small open space, private open space right next to a stormwater basin. I put Wild Horse on here, but I realized later that that one is a large stormwater pond, but it really is not, doesn't have trails developed around it, so it really doesn't fit into this example that I've put here. The subdivision code also has a couple other paragraphs that speak to sort of open space requirements. Those are the reservation of school sites as adopted plans, and of course school sites usually have playgrounds, that sort of thing. And then it also mentions trails and parks noted on adopted plans. So the challenges with the current practice are really there's no formula in the code to determine how much space should be set aside to meet the needs of the residents of the subdivision. And so that is often a really tough negotiation that happens at the preliminary plat stage, looking at a lot of different factors. And it is pretty tough for staff to negotiate that during that process because, of course, the property owner, the developer, wants to develop as much land as possible for home lots. And so that's a pretty tough negotiation. We often use the comprehensive plan as a guide. And if land dedication is proposed, we would consult the Parks and Recreation Commission to determine if that land is suitable. Not all pieces of ground are suitable for open space. Maybe they're too sloping. Maybe it's in the wrong location. Maybe it's the wrong size. So that's really, we consult with the Parks and Rec Commission before bringing it to the Planning and Zoning Commission. Some examples of parkland proposed in preliminary plats are, again, West Fork Crossings. There's a 2-acre park proposed in that subdivision in a later phase, and Hidden Pines, again, that small area of private open space. A lot of cities have struggled with these kinds of questions, of course, and if it's a small subdivision and it doesn't seem reasonable to have a small park, or the Parks Department decides it's really too much work to maintain all these little tiny parks. So cities have struggled and said, okay, well, maybe we need to have a fee in lieu of parkland instead, if it's so that we come up with a formula for that. Well, there was a recent court case, I guess not so recent anymore, 2002, but the Iowa Supreme Court held that the West Des Moines, their fee in lieu of was acting as an illegal tax, meaning it wasn't really being spent on parkland or park space or park amenities in the subdivision in which it was collected. And so they ran into trouble there, and this caused many cities to review their ordinances, particularly if they had fee in lieu ordinances on the books. Now there's a number of cities that do continue to have those, but then they've tightened those rules about spending that money within a certain period of time in the subdivision in which it was collected. So basically, the legal requirements, and Mr. Rogers can confirm this, but basically the requirement for dedication of land is lawful. So you can require a dedication of land in your subdivision code if it's related to and proportional to the needs caused by the development. So that's how how do we determine that? Because if it's beyond that, of course, the city must pay fair market value for that property. An example of this would be the 14-acre piece of parkland that the city acquired next to Aldrich Elementary School. That would be larger than a typical neighborhood-sized park, but it really is going to serve the need of all the subdivisions in the area, and so the city did pay for that parkland. Again, we look to guidance we would look to guidance in our adopted plans. We do have a Cedar Falls Parks plan, but it is really quite outdated. So it's not very useful today. We do look to a comprehensive plan from 2012. There's quite a bit of information in that plan. They did an analysis of parkland. They talk about neighborhood parks serving areas that are within a quarter mile to a half mile walking distance of the homes, and that school parks can help meet that neighborhood park open space needs. And then also that we want to distribute parkland to provide equitable parks service for all citizens of the community. And there's a map in the comprehensive plan, which is quite interesting. It's a little hard to see on the screen here, but it shows basically quarter mile and half mile walking distances on the map, so you can see where the neighborhood parks are already, areas that are already covered with some neighborhood parks and areas that are not. And of course, the areas that haven't developed yet on the edges of town, growth areas in the northwest and southeast lack coverage. There are some zoning districts that do require open space as well, and those areas we have a little bit of guidance. The RP zone requires open space parkland, and that of course is negotiated at the time of rezoning with that master plan process. With the mixed use zone, there is a 10% of the development site must be set aside for open space. And examples of mixed use areas are Green Hill Village and Pinnacle Prairie. And both of those plans had identified park space on their master plans. The challenge with the MU district and the RP district is oftentimes those are conceptual. The master plans are for large areas and they do change over time. And then you have people that have moved into those subdivisions in the earlier stages, and then they feel like things have been promised to them and things are changed later on with the master plans. So that's also tough because sometimes these subdivisions can take 20 years to build out. So things do change, and how do you navigate the interests of current residents and future residents? Here's just an example of the Pinnacle Prairie East Master Plan. You can see here that they've identified some park space and trails. And again, this is a concept, and so when it gets to the platting, obviously it becomes reality, and then they really have to look at the topography and the floodplain and all those other factors. So just to wrap up, what are the next steps here? And that, I think you talked about this in your goal setting, is to develop new park and public lands master plan, and that's in your fiscal year 25 and 26 in your CIP. And some of the goals there with that are on the screen here. The one we're talking about tonight, of course, is to identify a specific park open space dedication method or formula that can be applied to new development, and really explore funding options for parks, whether it's through the subdivision process or through other means. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
All right, thank you. So I'll open it up to council for any questions. I guess, so I have a question. So when we do the park and public lands master plan in 25 and 26, assuming that with the budget and we get there and everything lines up, that plan is definitely going to include all of these items below, or which can turn into policy, or how much time and what does the process look like to maybe develop a specific number?
So what we'd be looking for there is really to hire a consultant that's an expert in this sort of planning, parks planning, so that they can show us what the best practices are, what other communities are doing, so that we can go through a public process there to come up with a new parks plan, really dive into what Cedar Falls needs and what Cedar Falls wants to have in their parks master plan. So really it's the scope is up to the council to decide at that time that we go out for an RFP for that.
And is the park and public lands master plan, is that separate? Was that within the comprehensive plan? That's a section of it, or is it its own entity?
It'd probably be its own standalone plan, but I think the way I guess I think about it is all of these plans that we're doing, a lot of times we think of them as being just specific plans that are related to our comprehensive plan or an integral part of our comprehensive plan for the city. But no, I would think it would come forward to you as a separate item for adoption.
Okay. Other questions? Yes, Councilmember DeBur.
You mentioned at the start of your presentation that it was referred in about 4.5 months ago. Can you remind me what the what the reason of the referral was? Was it just to see if we were going to do the master plan, or was there something else?
I believe it was Mr. Harding that referred in, and it was very small. It's like 15-second referral at that very end of a meeting.
It was at the end of the meeting because I had received email and some questions about open green space going forward. And when I inquired from staff, they said we had some, stuff in place. And since I hadn't ever seen it, I wanted to see the infomercial on where we were at currently and where we were going to go with it.
Gotcha. Okay. Thanks.
Other questions?
Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir. Councilmember Cruz.
Karen, are we going to incorporate the place to play, special needs parks and equipment in this somewhere? Or is that going to be a separate topic besides?
As part of the Parks Master Plan?
Yeah.
I would certainly think that, like I said, everything could be included as far as thinking about broadly what the community needs. And if that's something that we, would be exploring, that certainly would be.
Sure. I'm of the opinion that the public would like to see those types of features in our parks sooner than later. And 25, 26, I guess it's not that far, but it's far enough down the road that I'd consider getting some of those things put into our parks sooner.
Yeah, and certainly the council has the power, and when we're doing parks improvements and bringing things forward, they certainly can happen sooner than the parks plan. The parks plan would just be simply stating that was our goal, to do some of those things.
So in our current plan, if there's any equipment that gets replaced or maybe deemed unsafe, like the old jungle gym bars we had when we were in kindergarten that now would, people would scream. Do we have ideas coming forward from parks that would cover that?
Yes, when we go to replace equipment, we're looking at other inclusive elements that we can include. Another example would be we're working on the design of the Searly Park, including elements, fencing, turf, similar to Place to Play.
Okay.
And I know, having dealt a little bit with Searly and talked with some people in the ward about it, that it also comes down to funding as well, as far as like what that can they raise to match, because a lot of that public, private partnership comes into play. A lot of people are really stepping up to try to raise some money to get some better playground equipment. So if you want better playground equipment in a neighborhood near you, reach out. I could always use help. I was going to say that,
Fencing.
yes, and fencing. I think the concern from the citizens that I've talked to just happen within developments, because once the green space is gone, you don't get it back, right? It's developed. Everything is easily developed, but then once it's gone, it's gone. And so I think the concern from people that I've talked to is us creating and identifying a specific method or formula with which we could apply as a policy, because ultimately it's gone when it's gone. And if we continue to develop, we just want to be responsible about it. I realize that there's a money factor there for developers, and I respect that. But I think identifying a formula or a way that we can apply this to new developments coming forward is really important. So, as long as that's one of the things, I know future council gets to decide this, and I won't be there to make that happen at that point in time. So watch the tapes back.
Yeah, and I think certainly you still have the power. I mean, the code says that it must meet the needs of, and that's open for interpretation, and I think you'd have to use that wisely. But I think that's also what Planning and Zoning Commission does, and community members do, to say, hey, this is a development of this many acres, and we've got all these new households here. There should be some open space in this development. So I think it's a reasonable thing to ask for when subdivisions come through. It's just not an easy negotiation. So,
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir. Councilmember Cedar.
It all sounds well and good, these properties cost the developers money, and when we're trying to get developers to come in here to say, you're gonna put this many acres aside, the city should pony up and buy those acres, and that be a city park, and then run with city funds from then on. That'd be a lot less burden to them. And also, I think that's only fair to make somebody, this is an abstract thing. Simon, you love to check the boxes. There's no box to check here. You're gonna negotiate this stuff. That's not the way it should be. Should be X amount of acres, but city should pay for that. So that's my feeling on that.
I do
That's
think
all.
that's a good point. I do think it should be a formula that can at least be applied, even with exceptions. And then as far as the city buying it, I mean, I'd be open to that, but that's a different discussion than and a policy discussion that we could refer, but that becomes tricky.
Councilman Hart.
Yes, sir. I mean, yes, ma'am.
Whatever. What I'm taking away from this is I believe this has been on the Parks Master Plan. I believe the last 3 goal sessions that I participated in, we've asked if that's something we want to keep on our goal setting, and I believe it's still there. So when it comes down to goal setting, I think what's important for us who will still be on council to remember, and hopefully the folks that will join us, is first of all, we have to support it, both with policy and the financial backing of actually paying for the Parks Master Plan. And then as we talk about equipment, I'm pretty sure that equipment is not, they're not giving it away. So we have to also make sure that we as a council have policy in place to have the financial resources to make those things happen. And we can have all the dreams in the world, and I don't think there's a single person probably up here that doesn't want all the things that happen at Place to Play. I would love that all over our community. But when it comes down to it, we've got to have policy and we've got to have money. So I appreciate this presentation, and I hope that we remember this when we come to goal setting in November or whenever we're going to do it.
Other council members?
I think, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, council.
I think, Karen, I just want to make sure I understand correctly how this will happen. Should we develop this? Obviously, we do need to have some metrics around how we're going to develop and what parks we're going to require. I recall this development where residents were concerned about not having enough park land, and I think it was the one Simon referred from. In that instance, how would we have done it differently without this policy? I guess I want to walk through what it looked like and make sure that that's correct. So the residents said, hey, we want a park, but the developer said, hey, there's no requirement for a park. So that final platting came to P&Z, and it didn't get included with a park or a dedicated space, but it passed P&Z, and then it came to us with, hey, it was approved by P&Z, and it didn't have park space, but it's going to go ahead and pass. And so we passed that development without the park included at the resident's request. To mitigate that, the only way to do that really is to have this plan in place in advance. Is that correct?
I don't recall any specific, we do, every time a subdivision is proposed, we talk to the developer about having some open space. The open space adds value to the subdivision, and so it is a requirement of the subdivision code. So we ask them to propose something. So the proposal comes from the developer. They tell us what they think is reasonable, and then we go from there. So no, I don't think we have had our hands tied as far as requesting reasonable amount of park neighborhood open space for a subdivision. And I don't recall any subdivision where you guys couldn't. I don't believe there was. I'm not recalling any case.
You have to provide the example you're thinking of.
Something on the western side of town, and I may be misremembering. I'm not, let's call it a hypothetical at this point, but it would be better for us to have this plan in place.
Well, it certainly would be easier for all involved. I mean, just like anything in the code, the more you can have it spelled out, be more clear and objective, the easier it is both for all sides, right? But it is a requirement currently in the subdivision code, so we do expect them to propose something.
So I have a quick question, and then I'll hand it down. So would it be prudent for us to figure out a way to have a method or formula before we wait for a master plan? Is that something that staff would appreciate, or is it okay to negotiate still, and you'd like to wait and to get a whole comprehensive public lands master plan before we change policy? Put you on the spot a little bit, but I'm asking, what do you want for Christmas?
Well, I think, the nice thing about a parks master plan is you're really digging into what's best practice. So, if we're gonna come up with a policy, I'm sure you're gonna look to us to do some research and find out what other communities are doing. So you end up having to do a lot of work from the staff, and so the question is, if we have the staff resources to come up with a reasonable policy without doing a bunch of research about it. So, yes, we would like to have a more definitive standard in the code, but it needs to fit into, the work plan that you set for us.
Councilmember DeBerre?
Now that you guys kindly reminded me, I believe the division you were talking about was just west of Union Road, just south of Cherrywood, where that was originally set up, and the yards along the west edge of Union Road was the land that was set aside. It didn't develop, and it later became lots in people's backyards.
So I think there's been a lot of correspondence perhaps with the council about something that has not yet come to the council. I think that's the Autumn Ridge subdivision.
No,
you're not.
No, south of Cherrywood and west of Union Road. It's all developed now with homes.
Well, there's a portion
Is that the
of
Wild Horse subdivision?
I don't know what it's called. But originally, the backyards, that was the open space that was set aside. And then as the houses finally started getting built, the backyards, the open space became their backyards.
Can go back and look at that plan. Wild Horse was previously Copperstone, dates back to 2008 or earlier, so we'd have to dig a little bit to see maybe what was originally a plan there.
I kind of think the area that Susan's talking about is maybe at the corner of Highway 58 and Union Road. If you go to the south of there's discussion or maybe some long-term development that's maybe in that area. And then it's that row of houses with the ravine.
South of the old Public Works building.
Okay, that's,
Okay.
Question for Kevin Rogers. Do we have any idea, or would you have any idea of what other cities do with their ordinances or their subdivision law, quote unquote, as to what the formulas they use, or do we not have that information?
I haven't looked into that. I know there are varying approaches to this issue. I know that every city I'm aware of are interested in open green spaces, but there are a lot of ways to skin the cat there. And so, like plucking a formula or something, I don't think is really feasible because it depends on the community and it depends on the subdivision in the area. So I'd hate to be tasked with coming up with it because that's why I think we need the experts to help us with that.
That makes sense. So it's tricky, I get it. Yes, Councilmember Cruz?
Thank you. So, listening to the various comments, Dave brought up the idea about city-owned property established ahead of time. And I'm thinking about park areas versus public lands. To me, like the park area that's been described in some of these is a small, quaint space with some trees and maybe a water feature. Then you go to a bigger level, public lands, where it'd be big enough to have festivals for a neighborhood. And I don't know that many of these ideas here would have room for a big festival with a couple thousand people attending, a band shell, features like that. I mean, that would be kind of cool, so they're not just all downtown. They could be out throughout the city. So I think that should be some consideration put towards that to really make it cool as an area of the neighborhood. And whether it's an HOA versus the city, that's a discussion. HOA seems like the smaller little acres here and there and so on, where, as Dave described, the city owned, 10, 20 acres maybe as we expand the city, get a whole much bigger area.
So if you're interested in diving into this a little more detail, there is a nice accounting of the parkland in the comprehensive plan, and it lists some of those regional parks, and it talks about the distinction between neighborhood parks versus regional parks and what we have now in the park, and it does, I think, give some comparisons with other communities even. So there's a nice analysis there if you're interested.
So I think for time's sake that we're about ready to move on. To sum up, green space is important to us. It obviously we all have. It's actually a much bigger topic than I thought. And Kevin Rogers' answer, and then what Councilmember Cruz just brought up, make me think there's a lot of moving parts here. So I get it. We really need someone who does this for a living to help provide us with information. So let's also be cognizant of what Councilmember Dunn said about at goal setting, really focusing on green space and making sure that we push for that. So thank you for the presentation. Is there anyone who wants to say one final thing quickly? All right. So thank you, Ms. Howard. We appreciate it. We are now moving over to the Finance and Business Operations Committee, and I will now pass over to Chair Dunn.
All right, thank you very much. Tonight's topics, the first topic for the Finance and Business Operations Committee is parking permits for downtown municipal lots, and that will, can we start with a presentation from staff member Marcy Breitbach.
Good evening, Council.
Hello.
Good evening.
Try to work this here. Sorry about that. Thank you. Hi. All right. My name is Marcy Breitbach. I am the Parking Operations Supervisor. So we are here tonight to discuss downtown parking permits. To start off, why are we here discussing the 48-hour parking? We were here because a referral was made by City Council to discuss the current 48-hour parking restrictions in the municipal lots for the permit holders. We will be presenting information on reasons for the 48-hour parking, how 48-hour parking is enforced, and possible options. Why was the 48-hour parking restriction put in place? Originally, there were concerns that were expressed by business owners and residents during parking studies about availability, turnover, and accessibility of the parking spaces due to vehicles that weren't moving regularly. A 48-hour limit also prevents long-term parking and storage of vehicles, trailers, RVs, etc., in the municipal lots. As you can see below, there's a couple of photo examples of the issues that relate to long-term parking in the lots. Just as a little background of the current process that's used by the public safety officers and the parking attendants to enforce 48-hour parking goes as follows. Step 1 is to chalk the tires. Step 2 is to come back 48 hours later. Step 3, if the vehicle has not moved, they'll issue at that point a 48-hour citation. Step 4, they'll adhere an orange sticker on the driver's side window with the date, time, and reason it was marked. Step 5, they will then come back again after 24 hours. And then step 6, they'll adhere a green sticker to the front windshield on the driver's side, allowing to and tow the vehicle. Just as a note, vehicles, as you go through those steps and you count that up, vehicles are generally parked for at least 72 to 96 hours before being towed. And we typically don't normally tow a vehicle, normally even mark a vehicle, unless a complaint has been received or it's visually noticeable that it hasn't been moved in quite some time. And obviously that's a little easier to see during the winter months, after snowfalls and things like that. So this brings to the question, are we looking for a solution to a problem that doesn't exist? The ordinance section establishing a 48-hour limit in municipal lots was adopted in October of 2019. Since adoption, there's been very few citations issued for the 48-hour violations in the downtown municipal lots. Actually went through and ran the numbers on this, and there was a total of 25 citations in over 3 years, and that's for all 5 of the downtown lots. So option 1, this is just an option, but not really an option as you look back on the photos that on the previous slide. This option is no enforcement of the 48-hour parking limit in the downtown municipal lots for permit holders. In our opinion, it's not a good option based on the issues noted previously, as mentioned and seen in the previous photo examples. The pros of this option, it does allow parking beyond 48 hours for the residents, business owners, and employees who have permits. Cons, as you can see, there are a lot more cons as depicted in the photos earlier. One of the cons, there's nothing to prevent using the municipal lots as long-term storage. And this may again create challenges for the city to maintain the lots, and the same issues may arise again. It also creates an inconsistency with the 48-hour limit on the on-street parking. The city does not allow long-term unlimited parking anywhere else. It also reduces turnover of parking for customers, businesses, and residents. Through our research, we actually did not find any examples of other cities allowing long-term parking in their municipal lots. Option 2, we continue to enforce 48-hour parking time limits in the municipal lots regardless of the parking permit status or residency. The pros that go along with this option, this creates consistency with the 48-hour limit on the on-street parking. It provides the tool and ability to remove vehicles, et cetera, that are not being moved regularly. It encourages turnover of parking for customers and residents. It aids regular maintenance of the lots by city crews. There's been very few issues or citations have been issued for this violation in the municipal lots since being adopted in 2019. The cons associated with this option, the residents would have to go move their vehicle once every 48 hours. There are no options for occasional long-term parking needs, such as, for example, during vacations, business trips, etc. Option 3, continue enforcing 48-hour limit for regular parking permit holders with an option to apply for a temporary long-term parking when needed and pay an additional cost per day through a separate application process. The pros to this option would be it creates an extended parking option that would accommodate residents and business owners when longer-term parking is needed, again, for example, during business trips, vacations, etc. The additional cost would discourage the number of long-term parking permits, which would also prevent long-term storage. Permit holders, all permit holders would pay the same initial amount and get the same time limits. Some cons to this option would be we would be unable to prevent long-term permit holders from using municipal lots as long-term storage, and the potential issues from before may arise again. There would be an additional cost for those needing long-term parking options. It is inconsistent with the 48-hour on-street parking limit, and the city does not provide long-term parking options anywhere else, for example, on the streets. It also creates additional work for the city administrative staff. The staff recommendation, we're recommending option 2 for a few reasons. To continue enforcing the 48-hour parking limit in the municipal lots for permit holders. We would issue a one-time courtesy warning if a vehicle has not received a citation for this type of violation in the past. We would continue regular communications with Community Main Street. We would increase awareness by adding and clarifying parking limits on the parking permit website. This has actually already been completed. And we would revise the current parking ordinance for improved clarity and consistency. Lastly, at this point, does anybody have questions?
I have a question. Is the only change on this option 2 that you had was the one-time courtesy warning? Is that really the only change to what we currently are doing? Yeah, I see Jackie saying yeah.
Yeah, and typically our parking attendants, we don't do that just for this type of ordinance, but they have the ability on their handhelds to see previous citation history. So we do issue a lot of one-time courtesy warnings just to, if we can see that somebody's not experienced of a citation for that type of violation, just because we like to educate and give people that option to know going forward.
All right, thank you. Any further council questions? Councilman Cruz?
The courtesy notice, is that a phone call to someone? Or
It's an actual warning on the citation itself. It says warning at the top.
On the
There's no
vehicle.
dollar amount associated with it.
So somebody that's out of town for an extended period of time would not have the opportunity to see that warning?
I mean, correct. They could always log into the citation portal and see if any citations have been issued to their plate.
But if they weren't aware of the limit in the first place? I mean, throughout this presentation, I see a comparison with street parking to parking lot, and I don't see that as a comparable because the parking lots are designed for residents that don't have dedicated spots, the opportunity to buy a privilege to park there. And that would be long-term because if they live downtown, work downtown, they should be able to park there long-term. And I compare this thinking to what we affectionately called Siberia by the Unidome when we were in the dorms. Cars would park there for weeks and months and never move. And you'll see the snow like you depicted in one of those pictures there, but that quickly melts away. And I've never really seen an issue with that in the Dome parking lot. And there's other lots in town that would be private lots, and they don't have a 48-hour limit to move. So I think we're punishing people that don't have other opportunities to have garage space or, parking ramp or what have you for long-term parking. I'm really not in favor of a 48-hour limit in their city lots, and each lot's going to be different. If we have an issue, which we don't seem to have an issue, because what was it, 25 citations in 5 or 6 lots over 4 years, 5 years? That's minimal. That's very minimal. So we're creating a solution for a problem that doesn't exist, as you mentioned. So,
But again, that's because we have the 48-hour in place. If you don't have it in place, that was the reason it was put into the ordinance to begin with, is because there were concerns that were brought to city's attention.
So was there a big increase in citations in the last year or so with this concern?
This was put in place in 2019.
But since 2019, has there been, because of the concerns? So you say there's concerns that people are parking 48 hours, but I don't know that
Prior to it being put in place.
So prior to 2019, people could park unlimited with a parking permit without having to move. We didn't have a 48-hour limit. We couldn't have them removed.
There were problems, and that's
But
why we had the ordinance.
But there were problems that were expressed during the study that businesses and other residents were saying, this is causing problems. It's now not just taking up one space. Now we can't get into 2 or 3 of them. We can't walk here, we can't walk there because the snow is piling up around this car. And there was nothing we could do about it. So that's how that came about.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Councilman Ganfield.
I'd just like to clarify, get a couple of questions answered on that. When we implemented the 48-hour ban, how much did the permits go down in cost for the residents that were purchasing permitted passes? It's the same fee? Okay, so they lost their privilege to park, and they were still paying the same permitted amount. What communication went out to tell them, hey, you're no longer allowed to park here for 3 days in 2019?
It was approved by city council for an ordinance change. So, I mean, it would have been the same, any kind of ordinance change that we do, it would have been the
Right.
same practice that you do for any ordinance change. It goes, social media.
Sure. So by and large, I mean,
meetings.
it's not incumbent upon us to communicate to every single
I
citizen.
mean, we do try to communicate with Community Main Street, College Hill Partnership, all of them. But yeah, it is up to public and things to, it's notified just like
Yeah,
any other
ignorance of the
ordinance
law
change.
is not an excuse against the citation. I totally get that.
Correct.
I did ask, and I apologize, I asked about the 35 citations, but we've had 25 citations since this ordinance change. We had 1 in these downtown lots in 2020, 3 in 2021, and then the bulk were in 2022, and 2 thus far in 23. I don't think the citizens were aware of that change or used to it. There wasn't any change in the fee structure. I guess I'd also like to see, so that's the end of my questions. I guess what I'd like to see is an option 4 that provides for this long-term permit, as Councilman Cruz is talking about. If it's a long-term permit for those folks that don't have private property to park upon, they may pay an extra revenue to the city in order to allow them to park there, with some stipulations that say, if there's a problem where we need to set those parameters, we would ask you guys to set those parameters. But I'd like to see an option 4 that provides for a long-term permitted parking that's not just temporary, but then also to continue that 48-hour. Even myself as a resident on the public streets, a 48-hour ban was not something I was aware of, and one of my neighbor's vehicles was tagged during a snowstorm. During that time, I found out that was the only time we can enforce a 48-hour ban is when it's been covered in snow for 2 days, so that it's obvious it hasn't moved.
48
there's
hours
some-
can be enforced anytime on the streets.
It can, but it's not. So the enforcement of it can be inconsistent to our citizens, and they're not used to it. So when you all of a sudden tow someone's vehicle, when they hadn't looked up the law for themselves, but we also hadn't told them that anything changed, that's disruptive and disappointing to our citizens. So I'd like to see an option 4, if I could ask of council to see a long-term permit option that's maybe even a higher fee, but we'd leave that to your recommendation, and then see how that could work in to our citizens' favor.
Council.
I have a question.
Councilman Harding, please.
We need some answer. So you can get. I mean, I think we're here where we're at. People complained before, people complain now. So let's just see what we can do. It's no one's fault. We're just here. All right. So you can apply for a permit, whether or not you live there. You can just get permits, correct? So my thought is, why don't we make a residential permit for the municipal lot rather than a long-term one? Because we don't want, the whole goal is, we don't want people just getting a permit and staying there. So if we had permits available for our employees and permits available for anyone to get, but we also opened up a permit for just people who can proof of residence right there, that could be for a longer period of time. It seems like kind of a compromise and a middle ground as far as how many people we would have with long-term permits. So is that something, I mean, I get it that we want to have we lose control over those, because if we have 48 hours gives us more control, but it would be nice if there was a possibility, if they could prove residency, that they could get a long-term permit. So is that something that could be feasible?
Well, that is really what we were trying to offer in option 3.
But everybody could apply for it. So that because with idea 3, anybody who could get a permit could apply for a temporary. I'm talking about just people who live there. That way, it's a lot smaller number. Mm-hmm. So in other words, it would just be people who could proof of residency would be able to get a longer spot for a specific municipal lot down there.
Okay.
Madam-
Yes. The staff, please answer, and then we're going to pause with council, and I'm going to give the public an opportunity, and then we'll come back to council, okay? I think we all have lots to say.
I just wanted to clarify, so you're saying they would have no limit at all? Like they could park there 24/7 for 365 days in a year?
That's how it was before, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
And there were
but
problems.
just people who prove residency, not every permit holder.
I will say that the problems were with residents before, but I just want to put that out.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to pause for a second. Thank you for answering that question. Is there anyone from the public that would wish to speak on this item?
Julie Shemick, 104 Main. I have it on my notes. Even with the 48-hour, I can, in that lot, my permit is only good for the one lot. But if you have the 48-hour ordinance, all I have to do is move my car to another spot. I'm not freeing up parking, so we're not taking up more parking than usual because we would just move our car 2 spots over, 1 spot over, or whatever. And as Simon said, once you remove parking, once it's gone, it's gone. So when I did my loft back in 2007, we had multiple places. We had 24-hour lots that were unpaid that we could park in. So I like Simon's idea for tenants that they can get one that is a little bit more expanded. Usually we move our car a little bit more. I just happened to get trapped in an airport, so I wasn't back to see the sticker or the ticket or anything. So it makes sense for residents, and if it is abused, you can revoke their permit at any time, I would assume, or just not reissue them a permit. So there is control to that parking lot. Either that or you're going to have to open our permits up to other lots so we can move and have a place to park if we live there. So that's just my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else from the public wish to speak on this item? Okay. Yes. Thank you, Don. Name and address, or if you feel comfortable, whatever you feel comfortable for the record, please.
Okay. Well, today I'm Dawn Wilson, and I own Cup of Joe, and I also have a residency or apartment above Cup of Joe. And I just want to say I do like the idea of just there are tenants that do live down there, you know, for their life. And then there's tenants that might have just a turnover every year. And believe me, the tenants are not going to want to keep paying that price for the permit if they're not there. So I do think something that Simon did recommend was just something for like long-term tenants to be able to have like a different permit so that they are, you know, if they do go on vacation or they're out of town or something like that. I do recommend that. What do you want to say, that motion or whatever you want, that suggestion? So, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, yes. Name and address for the record, please.
Hi, Josh Wilson, 100 East 2nd Street. So I'm one of the special people in that parking lot because it's the same parking lot, but somewhere along the line, the person who owns my building was granted, I guess, the parking spots along my building, the 100 East 2nd. So that's for the people in the public, that's the Hertz Donuts building, as I affectionately call it. So I have a spot 24/7, 365 days a year. I travel to DC often. I've been gone for a month at a time. And my car is allowed to park there in the same lot, although Mrs. Shimmick can't park there for 48 hours. So to me, that seems unfair. So I don't know what happened in the past that allowed one person in the community to have rights to, you know, certain parking spots in that lot. But I feel for those business owners that don't have that same luxury. As far as, I'm not disagreeing that there might be problems down there from time to time, but we're all pretty close-knit. It's a great community. We all know each other. Today I had my vehicle appraised in the parking lot, and within 10 minutes I had 3 phone calls from neighbors wondering if I knew my vehicle was being, you know, dealt with. So we all kind of know who's down there, who's parking. If there is a problem, we're usually pretty aware of it. As Julie pointed out, you know, we could have people just moving their cars every 48 hours if needed, but again, that could be as simple as pulling out of the spot and right back in, because that's going to get rid of your chalk on the tire. I really like your idea, Simon. I really think it's great, and you would know there's only so many apartments down there, so you would have like a definitive number of possible permits of residents that would be eligible to park in there. But the other thing is, I think communication is lacking and maybe could be added in somehow in terms of like the courtesy warnings that go out, because it's basically pointless to give someone a warning like on their physical vehicle if they're not in town to be able to see the physical warning. So, you know, a phone call, again, all these people are permitted, so we have all of their information, you would think, at City Hall, and a courtesy call would probably save you having to tow or do anything else with a vehicle. So I'm in favor of the residential permit. I think that's totally a great compromise, so I appreciate you bringing that up, Simon.
All right, anything or anyone else from the public wish to speak on this item?
Gabe Grodhouse, 2715 Garden Ave. I guess I really would be in favor of Simon's idea as well. I don't live downtown, but go down and use it quite a bit, and I feel like it's a part of something we can give up as someone who comes in to have the benefit for people who live down there and give them something. And maybe I have to walk a little further, but that's something I think that's willing to give up to the, I guess, public works or folks. I know the pictures with the snow and the vehicles. Is there certain, and I don't know the answer to this, but there'd be certain spots where they would say, hey, we can't have the residents here because of snowways or pushing snow or things there. I don't know if that would alleviate some of the pressure that way. Just a thought. So thank you. Thank you.
Anyone else from the public wish to speak on this item? Okay, so we'll bring it back to council. I'm going to take some, Mr. Heath, would you mind commenting about how it works when there's vehicles, when there is snow, and how does it work when vehicles are, what I will say, in the way?
We don't have a real set plan on that. Most of the time, we're able to get in and out. We sometimes during the day, depending on when the snow falls, we're able to plow a path through there. And then when we have like an early morning cleanup or something like that, we'll come back and typically we'll have space to push the snow to a particular spot. Then we come back and clean it out later on. But we don't have a real set plan. We just kind of wing it when we go in, just based on where the cars are parked.
Sure.
That's kind of how we handle that.
And I know you've been around long enough to know, do you remember what it was like before we had the 48-hour rule? Do you recall that, you know, if some of those cars like up on, say, College Hill or in downtown didn't move for 300, I'll just be dramatic, 365 days, how did that work? I mean, how does that work for, because I remember winters, not too long ago, where some of those winters we've had dump after dump after dump after dump, and it was a challenge just to, I mean, you guys moved a lot of snow out of here just to have any parking in downtown.
Well, back when you speak of that before, you know, before all the development was done downtown, the parking lots were much larger. We didn't have the obstacles of the bump outs, the medians, things like that. So it was a lot easier to move snow 8-10 years ago than it is today. So we used a lot larger equipment back then as well. We was able to use an inloader, for example, with a push blade or or a larger dump truck at that time. And now we've got to finesse our way through there with a smaller ton truck or a small inloader type piece of equipment. So it's hard to kind of compare how that worked because the parking lots were so wide open back then.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right. Thanks.
I have a question for him as well.
All right. Sounds good.
Mr. Heath, the parking lot that we were all talking about, the one that's up there behind Vintage Iron, do you clear that entire parking lot?
Not the entire parking lot. There's some private areas.
Where are the private areas?
Excuse me?
Where are those private areas?
They're more to the east and a little bit to the south of that parking lot. We go in, we take care of the alley, and we take in straight north, and then we got an open area kind of north and a little bit east.
So it's not completely a public parking area there?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Anything else?
All right.
We'll call you up once you get back.
I'm sorry, we only have one opportunity for public comment. I'm sorry. Further council comments here.
Well, go ahead, Councilmember Dwyer.
Well, I was just going to say, I would encourage that we stick with the option 2 as presented by the staff with that added one-time courtesy warning, because if you go to this new option you're talking about with number 4, I'm thinking about this open permit, and you're talking about residents only. How do you determine which resident? Is it for this building only? I mean, we're all residents of Cedar Falls, so why wouldn't I be able to buy a permit just like I can today? And then if you're going to talk about having long-term permit for some people, well, what about the people who have residences in town that have limited street parking, or we all have to move our vehicle within 48 hours, so are you going to offer them the opportunity to buy a long-term pass as well? It just seems like you're kind of opening a can of worms when instead, you know, they had this problem in 2019, and that's why they did this 48-hour rule. It is citywide. I just think it would be better to stick with this option too.
Thank you. Anyone else from council wish to speak? Yes, Councilman Cruz.
I like Simon's suggestion, and it relates directly to what I experienced in another large community. We have resident permits that you go down to City Hall with your car registration, your driver's license, some proof that you own a building, or a lease, something that says you are a resident of that specific perimeter area, with the intention that that parking lot for us in the city is for the residents that don't have dedicated off-street parking. I think that's important to have that. Throughout the rest of the city, 48 hours is for snow, street cleaning, snow removal, that sort of thing. You know, I'm thinking, this is in Hermosa Beach, California. They have weekly street cleaning where your permit that you get, it's a one-time fee for the year. It's pretty economical. It's $80. You don't pay it monthly or anything like that. And I can park at any of the meters. I just have to move for the Monday street cleaning or the Tuesday street cleaning on whichever side of the street it is. So it's done throughout communities. It's done in New Orleans as well. I'm familiar with a program they have down there where they get an annual permit to park in the street. You just have to move for street cleaning. So if parking lots have a street cleaning cycle, Brian, maybe you could say yes or no occasionally? Occasionally. Okay, as needed. But I like Simon's idea. I don't think it'll hurt the rest of the city. We're talking about specific parking lots with unique permits for residents that can prove they live there, show their vehicles registered to that address, and it's done across the country, and it would be easy for staff to research what other communities like that have. I'm very much in favor of that, so I would make that motion to put in effect Simon's idea in some fashion.
I guess I'll second it. And I have a question or clarification. I guess to Councilmember DeBurse's point, it would just be people who could prove residence and no other, with no off-street parking right there. So it would, that would be it. It wouldn't be open to anybody. It would be specifically people who own that area or prove that they live there. So.
But as a taxpayer, I should be able to buy that permit too if I wanted to store a trailer there long-term. It just doesn't seem fair, since I'm a taxpayer too, paying for that municipal lot.
Councilman Schultz, please.
Yeah, I think we'd have to look at all the consequences because it's a double-edged sword, right? Part of this is businesses have a need for those parking spaces too. So although Simon's got a fine idea, we still only have limited spaces. So how many permits that would be, you know, by percentage of the spots in the lot or the residents? So I think we're kind of premature. Either we stick with their option 2 or we ask staff to give us some input on, well, how many residents would be applying for this? What would be the limit of it? Could we do the whole lot of, you know, of residential parking? And then you've lost all your commercial parking. So, yes.
So right now, based on the number of spaces in the lot, we only sell 20% of the spaces to permits.
So therefore, all the residents don't have a right to a spot anyway.
Oh, it's right on our website.
No,
I mean,
I know.
A permit, yeah, if you buy one, it doesn't guarantee you a spot.
So, okay. So that answers
But the question would be if the 20% is enough to cover the residents that don't have a dedicated spot, that live there and own their building, let's say. I mean, that's important. I mean, they live there, they should have a spot.
Okay, I'm going to speak real quick with my input. So I know it's not exactly the same, but once upon a time, and the College Hill and downtown have kind of switched over the years. Like, not to say that College Hill doesn't still get busy, but back in the late 90s, College Hill was very hard to get a parking spot. And while I don't want to seem like I'm not, like I can't feel where you're coming from, and I believe that you folks would be good neighbors and move your cars and not make it hard for our, if it snowed, make it hard for our city staff to plow and things like that. Not everyone is you. And so when we open it up, we do open it up for those pictures we've seen, where somebody decides to park their car and they don't move it for, 6 months. And what is our comeback for that? Like we've opened it wide up. You can just put your junk car that hasn't ran. And Councilman Ganfield mentioned, ignorance to the law is not an excuse. I absolutely believe that. I mean, a lot of times I think unless someone makes the complaint or it's obvious, it may not be something that's top on that someone notices. But I sure can tell you in my neighborhood, I mean, if I see somebody not, I can be empathetic, but you're not gonna leave your broken down junk car parked for more than the ordinance. And I appreciate, as a citizen, having that power to be able to call non-emergency and get that taken care of. So I'm not trying to be, I can feel for you. Also, people choose to move downtown, just like once upon a time we chose to live on the hill. And so then I knew, like, okay, I've got to play the game. I can only park on this side of the street one day, certain days of the week. It was just part of the no of me choosing to live on 23rd Street in Cedar Falls, Iowa. I hate for us to forget the history of what got us here, which is not that long ago. What did we say, 2018 we 19. Put this? 19? So 4 years. It just... And then at the same time, we have the constant complaint of we don't have parking for people. I just don't get it. I feel like we talk out of both sides of our mouth. I guess that's my input. I'm for keeping it as it is now.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Councilman Cruz.
Regarding the junk car situation, Director Birdie, junk cars have to be licensed, operational, movable. You can't have the, junk vehicle that seems to be described here.
They do. If it's on a street or a parking lot, it should be registered and everything. But I was going to say, without weighing into what you guys decide, predating Kim Bear, predating Carol or Carol Lilly, we have had cars that we've had to tow out of the lots that have been stored there or doing maintenance in the lots and things like that through the years and through the past decades.
So you could develop a code language that says you can't work on your vehicle in the parking lot. I think, don't we have that now? Can I take my motor out of my car in the street?
Yes, people do that all the time.
Okay.
It's very common to find vehicles that are maintenanced, or when we do the 48 hours in the winter, it's very common to tow vehicles that don't have motors in them and vehicles that have been stored on the street. So.
Okay. Well, then another thought. The reason we have this concern from the public is, as Julie mentioned, the 24-hour parking was developed away, and it's gone. So the options that they had to put their cars a little further away on 24-hour, if they took a week-long trip, were there, and they're gone now. So we have to get creative with an idea, as is done in other communities that are very dense, is long-term options. And it's not that difficult to do. And we could try it for a while. The other option is to go to 72 hours instead of 48. Give a little more time in scenarios, because these people, it's their home. It's like we're telling them, like, I'm going to say, Gil, you can't park anywhere on your property. You got to move every 48 hours. But you say, I got my driveway. You got to move your car in your driveway every 48 hours.
But it's not the driveway. It's a municipal lot.
Well, it's their parking. It's their parking. That's where they
Right.
have
To
to park.
Kelly's point, that was a choice. And I can be empathetic too, but.
That choice goes back
And it's
18.
back to the double-edged sword.
Well,
You know, how much percentage? I like the 20%, and we maybe combine Simon's idea with the current 20% of making part of that a longer term.
maybe we don't need 20%.
Just a clarification. So I think we can get creative. I wasn't intending to change the 20%. I think everything should still stay in effect. I was just saying that if you can prove proof of residency, that we could get a longer term parking spot. I would even be up to, you know, if we need to have some way to get it moved, maybe we put something in there that's a month, or we do something where in a month you get called. I don't know. My thing is that I too lived in a bigger city and moved here, and I could go down to the city hall and take my license and take my residency and get a spot for downtown to park there, and I didn't have to move every 48 hours. I believe there was a limit, but I can't remember what it was. It was something much longer than that.
Probably.
But it was, yes, and you had to move on certain days for trash and street cleaning. But anyway, I really do think that we can get creative here and try to provide something. We don't have to go out of the 20%. We don't have to go insane, but the point of the idea was to try to get creative and to try to compromise and to try to create something that's there. And if it doesn't work out or people take advantage of it, we come back in a year and say we've had trouble with this and we remove it. We've changed a lot of things, so we could change it again.
I have one quick
Imagine that.
One moment. Director Rodenbeck, please.
Sure, I just wanted to clarify a few things. I think since 19, again, we've had a lot of parking meetings with downtown, so we understand the concerns, we've heard them. I think the problem has been is some of those logistics, just like Councilperson DeBoer pointed out. We talk about residency, but where's the residency? If I live on 6th Street, do I get to have it in the lot at Cup of Joe? Obviously that we'd have to define that. One of the other things that staff has talked about is how many is it? Is it one per bedroom? Is it one per person? Is it one per address, a space? And then I think I wanted to make sure everybody understood when Marcy mentioned about the 20% in the lot, it's still not guaranteed. So I can buy a parking permit and it's not guaranteed. So when you talk about those examples from other cities and you have a spot, I don't know if those all have to be marked then. These are the residential spots and these are it, or is it people can pay for one and they're not guaranteed to get a spot? So I think my only reason I just want to bring those up, if the council decides and he wants to give staff direction to come back with something, staff can come back with a proposal, but we might need a little more direction about some of those logistic questions. Again, is it one per address, one per bedroom? Some of that, is it guaranteed, not guaranteed? Some of those that would be helpful.
Because we do have some residents that have multiple vehicles, and they have permits for multiple vehicles.
Well, are they guaranteed one, or?
Again,
So then it wouldn't be guaranteed in this either.
Right.
It would be the same. Would have to be the same rules. It would just be showing that you live.
This very thing came up in Hermosa Beach where you'd get a wealthier homeowner with 4, 5, 6 cars. They'd get 4, 5, 6 permits. And to answer a question that Director Rodenbeck brought up, in Hermosa you can park anywhere in the city with that street permit that says you're a resident. Okay, in this particular lot, we can say that the residents, the homeowners, building owners, have the address adjacent to that lot, and they get to be there. Now, what is 20%? How many is in that lot? How many spaces?
I don't have that information.
Roughly.
I think it's 89,
200?
I think. I think it's around 90. Yeah, I think it's 89 in that particular lot, in Second
So
Street
18
East.
roughly spots. And then if there's 18 homeowners, might be an easy fit. I don't know. But to Julie's point is you can just keep moving that vehicle around. So you're not like creating new spots with this enforcement of 48 hours. You're just shuffling them all around. And the only time that's relevant is in the wintertime. Summertime, it doesn't really matter. So.
Well, sometime you can tell when some vehicles have not been moved as well.
Sure.
I guess one point of clarity I would like for something you said earlier, you mentioned that we took away the 24-hour parking. I would like to point out, right now, if you're a permit holder, so say you buy a permit for a lot, you get to park up to 48 hours. So, I mean, it's actually longer than the 24-hour lot was previously. You just have to move your vehicle every 48 hours.
Well,
You're getting to park longer than what the old lots were timed for.
Okay, to keep us on task here, because we're 10 minutes after the start of our next meeting, we still have 10 minutes worth of work at least to go. So do we all have enough information to make the motion on the floor? Do we want to repeat the motion that's on the floor for us to decide? And we can do a voice vote.
I'll give it a shot.
Okay.
The motion on the floor is to put in place residential parking permits in the city parking lots.
I have a feeling we'll probably have to come back
I think we would
if
need
this
some.
passes or not, but we
Yeah.
can probably start with this.
We need
Okay.
some research on what other cities are doing to come up with.
So what if it's a friendly amendment, or we amend it to bring back to committee some options for residential parking in the lots? That way we don't try to make staff come up with something and bring it right to council. We could, so.
Kevin says do it on the fly. Kevin likes that.
Are you going to throw this on to College Hill as well, the same stuff?
College Hill, I don't think wants to be touched, and this referral was specifically
This would be
for downtown.
specific
Oh, I
to
understand.
downtown.
I understand. I'm just asking.
Okay.
My referral is specific to downtown.
Okay. So are we okay with just doing that friendly amendment? Somebody want to second that to make it official?
I'll second the friendly amendment.
Okay. All right. So voice vote for all in favor all who are in favor of this proposed plan, please say aye.
Aye.
And all opposed, please say nay. Nay. All right.
Can we get a show of hands, please?
Show of hands. So the ayes and the nays.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Next up, the second item is fiscal year 2024 cash management report from Lisa Roney.
Okay, good evening. Tonight I will be presenting the cash management report for the fiscal year 2024. And I'll be reviewing the investments, rate of return, the cash reserves, and provide a snapshot of our financial position, and also reviewing the capital expenditures. Our main checking account remains at Farmers State Bank right now. We have 3 liquid money market accounts, and we do invest in certificate of deposits. Our average rate of return has increased this current fiscal year. It's averaging 4.12%, and that's up from 0.85 in fiscal year 22 and up from 21 at 0.37. So since the pandemic, we've seen some better interest rates. City staff wants to be good stewards of our public resources, and in order to do that, we want to maintain 3 financial principles in our investments. We want to maintain the safety of our principal. We want liquidity to match our monthly expenditures, and then we want a reasonable rate of return on those investments. Cash is the most liquid asset we have, and it is vital to our daily operations. The city uses 3 financial principles in holding cash. The first one is we want to meet our current obligations, again, paying our outstanding accounts payable or paying our employees. We do want to protect for uncertainties, whether it be a natural disaster such as a flood or an ice storm. or if it's a man-made disaster, maybe a chemical spill, or even a cybersecurity attack. Knock on wood, we haven't had either one of those. But we do want to maintain reserves in order to fund those events. Even if there is a declared emergency by the federal government or state government and there's funding involved, we still have to cash flow the costs for those events. The third reason in holding cash is that it does go towards our bond rating. In 2020, the city did receive an upgrade in our bond rating to a AAA rating, and that upgrade was contributed to our strong financial principles with our cash reserves and fund balances. The current city position is to maintain a fund balance between 15 and 25% in our general fund. And again, this is for cash flow and emergency purposes. And in 2003, city council directed staff to move towards the upper end of that percentage to the 20 to 25%. We also maintain cash reserves in these fund balances, so the refuse fund, sewer fund, the street, and stormwater funds. The balances are listed there. And then in the emergency reserve account, we try to maintain between $1.5 million and $2 million. Again, this is a financial decision that helps with the general operating of those funds and the emergency needs that might arise, and it also comes into play with our bond rating. Just a reminder, the 4 top funds on this slide can only be used for the specific services that they provide. A periodic review of our cash management program provides a snapshot of the financial positions of the 9 funds that are included in this report. If you review this chart, you'll see the spikes in the months of October, November, and April and May, and those are when we receive the largest property tax payments at the city. And then a decline in June, and that's when the construction season starts and our final capital expenditures are made for the fiscal year. The bulk of the taxes being received in only twice a year, the cash reserves help us bridge the gap between those months. For capital expenditures, staff makes a concerted effort to limit major expenditures in the months when the revenues are high, again, October, November, and April and May. And then departments do try to adhere to a schedule unless there is an emergency. One of the downplays of the pandemic was that we've now run into supply chain issues. So departments have had to deal with that in the last 12 to 18 months. Whether it's vehicles or park equipment, those types of things have been delayed in receiving those. This is the 33rd year for our vehicle maintenance program. Departments are able to extend useful life of vehicles longer. Management will budget when vehicles are close to failing, and they try to make those purchases late in the year. Having the city develop this vehicle maintenance schedule and having it budgeted in the budget actually helps us not to rely on cash reserves to make those purchases. In summary, the goal of the cash management report is to provide valuable information regarding the past, present, and future direction for the city's investments, cash reserves, and the capital expenditures. For fiscal year 24, we will want to keep an eye on our cash reserves with the commercial rollback legislation that took place a few years back. The state did backfill that funding that was lost, but that is being phased out, and by fiscal year 2029, there will be no more backfill. We will need to continue to monitor the local and national economy conditions, watching the current inflation rates, how they will affect the city. We will watch for the supply chain disruption and watch the labor market shortages that we've been seeing. Recently, state legislation came through with regards to property tax reform, the House File 718. Staff is still reviewing what the implications will be for the city, but those changes won't go into effect till July 1st of 2024. I would like to thank Kathy Niebergall, our finance technician, for helping me prepare this report. And I would seek a motion tonight to recommend approval of the fiscal year 24 cash management report. Are there any questions?
All right, any council questions?
Madam Chair.
Yes.
I have a couple questions. Where's our money that comes in from our TIF districts held? I know that we get in the revenues as tax money. The portion that was to go to the school is backfed by the state government, which makes them mad. And then the 10% that should go to the county is kept by us as well. And my question is, where is this money held when it comes back from the county after they've collected on these 5 TIF districts?
I'm going to refer that to Director Rodenbeck.
Sure. So remember, for our TIF districts, it's a reimbursement type. So we expend the money for the expenditures. So actually, we have a deficit in our TIF fund, and then as revenues come in, we're paying that back. Like, so if we paid for a road, we've already made those expenses. Then as the TIF revenue comes in, we're paying ourselves back for those expenses made. And we don't ever see, like you said, that the school portion, in terms of the state, it backfills that to the school, doesn't go through us.
Right, but we keep that portion that should have gone to the school. I've just started to do a little bit of work into this TIF financing, and the thing that surprised me was the city doesn't pay any maintenance cost out of the TIF money that comes in. That's all absorbed by the taxpayers who've been paying taxes for years. So to me, it's like an apartment building that we buy, we receive the revenues, but the poor taxpayers out there, the tax base, they're paying all the maintenance on that district. So my question always is, how much money comes in from our TIF district, since we have never relinquished any of them back to the taxpayers, and where is that money?
So I think, as we've talked about before, is that we have actually allowed some of our areas to expire. So like, I'll pick the Unified. There's actually $3 million that expired. Revenue since 18, so that's been going back to the schools, the county, the city, our portion. So some have actually already expired. We know in our Unified, there's ones that will be coming up that'll expire.
How big were those areas? You said that was a $3 million area?
$3 million in revenue.
Okay.
That has already expired. That happened in 18. So again, like, 1.4 million went to the school, I think 1.4, whatever, about to us, and then the remaining to the county. So that already happened in 18. I believe we have another area that's expiring in 2024. So again, when you say hold the money, we don't really hold the money, because we're reimbursing ourselves. We've already made all the expenses, and as the TIF revenues come in, we're reimbursing ourselves.
Your expenses, though, are actually capital improvements. We're buying the streets, we're buying the sewers,
Correct.
all those things.
Yeah.
So it's more of a capital improvement than an expense. I haven't got it all figured out yet, but I'm working on it. Because
no, you're right, it
we
is
have a
capital.
tremendous amount of industrial land, and we should be fat with money. And I just don't ever want to burden the taxpayers who have been making these payments for the maintenance costs, like the snow plowing, all those things.
Point of
So-
order. This is about the cash management thing, but
That's right. And this is about the cash. And this is about where our cash comes from. And this is about the taxpayer.
correct. But
That's what it is.
all right, well, if you want to be technical, if you're going to redo the road and you take it out of the TIF, if you don't take it out of the TIF, you're going to take it out of the general fund, which falls on the taxpayer anyway. So
This is only for the TIF districts, Simon. The TIF districts pay for themselves, but they're not paying for their own expenses. And the streets are new enough.
I know how TIF works.
Oh, well, then you'll be able to explain it to me after
Sure.
the meeting. Sounds
Yeah,
good.
we can
All
do
right. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Back on order here. Yes, Councilwoman DeBurr.
Jen, is what Dave's talking about what you refer to as the TIF bond fund, or is that, because that's where the expenses
Yes.
come from?
TIF bond fund, and so if you look in our budget, you'll see that that actually has a negative balance, the TIF bond fund, because again, we've made the expenses out, and we're still trying to pay ourselves back based on the revenue that comes in.
So to find it, you would look under the TIF bond
Yep,
fund.
yep, right in the budget, yep. Thank you.
Okay, any further questions, or would anyone like to make the motion if not?
Madam Chair.
Yes,
I
Councilman
hesitate to ask, but just
Banfield.
for clarity, Lisa, if you don't mind, the 20 to 30% in each of those reserve balances, that's 20% of what? Is there a cap on each of them that we try to maintain, or what's that percentage maintained against?
That's 20 to 25% of our annual revenues.
Of the revenue, okay, perfect. And then one follow-up question, why is there a concerted effort to limit capital expenditures when the revenues are highest? Is it just to keep the books easiest, or was there some other policy that we set?
I think it's, yeah, to keep the books easiest, so cash flow is more sustainable through the checking account and that sort of thing.
I guess it just seems backwards to me. When the cash is highest, it's not going to be a problem. Go ahead and spend it as needed for the city operations. But I just want to make sure I understood that, so thank you. Having said that, I would make the motion to recommend approval.
So move.
Okay.
Second, you mean?
Motion and second there?
Yep.
Second.
Okay. Any further council discussion, or we'll do a voice vote here? Okay. The motion on the floor is to recommend approval of the fiscal year 2024 cash management report. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, please say nay.
Nay.
All right. I assume you've got that there, Madam Clerk? Okay. All right. Well, that will adjourn this part of the committee meetings, and we'll come back, I think, in usually about, I don't know, Simon, what is it, 5, 10 minutes? 10 minutes. We'll be back for the council meeting. Thank you.